Most of the pain we experience never actually happens. It exists only in our imagination. It exists in a space between reality and imagination, between what is happening and what we fear might happen. We spend an incredible amount of our lives fighting battles that never materialize, carrying burdens that were never ours to carry, and reacting to stories that exist only in our minds. There is the world as it is, and then there is the world as we imagine it. The real world is made up of facts, conversations, actions, and consequences. It is observable and concrete. The imagined world is made up of assumptions, predictions, fears, and interpretations. It is the world where unanswered texts become rejection. Small mistakes become catastrophes, and uncertainty becomes proof that something is wrong. The problem is that our minds often struggle to distinguish between these two worlds. Consider something as simple as not receiving a text back from someone. In reality, all we know is that they have not responded yet. This is the entirety of the evidence available to us. Yet within minutes, the mind begins constructing explanations. Maybe they lost interest. Maybe they're upset. Maybe they found someone else. Maybe they never liked you in the first place. An entire narrative emerges from a single unanswered message. The human mind dislikes uncertainty. It wants explanations. When explanations are unavailable, it creates them. Unfortunately, these explanations often lean towards the negative. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency makes sense. It was safer for our ancestors to anticipate danger than to ignore it. A rustle in the bushes might have been the wind, but assuming it was a predator increased the chances of survival. The modern world, however, presents a different challenge. Most of the threats we face are social, psychological, or hypothetical, yet our brain still responds as if every uncertainty is a potential threat. The result is that we experience real stress over imagined outcomes. Our hearts race, our stomachs tighten, we lose sleep, our mood shifts, all because of scenarios that have not happened and in many cases never will. The suffering becomes real even when the source of the suffering is not. I experienced this recently while preparing for a presentation. I've never been completely comfortable with public speaking. When I learned I would have to give a 30-minute presentation in front of my class, I immediately began imagining everything that could go wrong. I pictured myself forgetting important points, stumbling over my words, and embarrassing myself in front of my peers. For weeks leading up to the presentation, I carried that anxiety with me. There was a knot in my stomach every day. Eventually, I decided to ask myself a question. What am I actually afraid of? The answer surprised me. I wasn't afraid of public speaking itself. I was afraid of failing in front of other people. More specifically, I was afraid of being judged. Once I identified the true source of the fear, I could address it directly. First, I prepared relentlessly. I practiced until I knew the material so well that failure became unlikely. The hard work of preparation transformed uncertainty into confidence. Secondly, I reminded myself of something simple but easy to forget. My worth as a person was not dependent on the outcome of a single presentation. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone has awkward moments. No presentation, no matter how good or bad, could fundamentally change who I was. Then the day arrived, and almost immediately something became clear. The anxiety that had occupied my mind for weeks disappeared the moment I began speaking. The experience itself was far less painful than my anticipation of it. In fact, the majority of my suffering had occurred before the event ever took place. That realization stayed with me because it revealed something important about the nature of fear. Often, we are not suffering from reality itself. We are suffering from our interpretation of reality. We suffer from imagined futures, hypothetical disasters, and stories that our minds create in an attempt to protect us. The irony is that this protective mechanism frequently creates the very pain it is trying to prevent. This does not mean that fear is irrational or that anxiety is a choice. Fear serves an important purpose. It alerts us to potential dangers and motivates us to prepare for them. The problem arises when fear ceases to be informative and becomes authoritative, when we stop treating our thoughts as possibility and start treating them as facts. Not every thought deserves belief, and not every fear deserves obedience. One of the most valuable skills we can develop is the ability to separate facts from stories. What do I actually know? What evidence exists? What assumptions am I making? These questions have a way of bringing us back to reality. Reality is often challenging. It contains disappointment, failure, uncertainty, and pain. But reality is usually far less terrifying than the endless possibilities our mind can generate. The future remains unknown. Other people's thoughts remain inaccessible. Complete certainty is always impossible. Yet, we always retain the control over one thing, and that is how we respond. When we choose to ground ourselves in what is real rather than what is imagined, we can choose evidence over assumptions. We can choose action over rumination, and in doing so, we may discover that much of the suffering we carry was never coming from reality at all. It was coming from the stories our minds were creating about it.